Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a very uncertain time. Our speaker too is here today amid some ongoing difficulties at home. Her mom is in the hospital, and she's not feeling too well herself. So we're really grateful also for Stuti, your time, and you being here today to share your experiences. We also spare a thought to those who are unwell, who are, either sick or providing care, and who can't be here today. So they're in our thoughts. Let me start by saying that this is going to be a week-long series about doctoral experiences of our JGU alumni. Um, Really, why we decided to have this conversation series was because a lot of people in JGU are interested in pursuing doctoral degrees. In fact, I just recently completed my doctorate, and to my utter surprise, have lived to tell the tale. So I thought maybe I might have a thing or two to also ask our alumni about their experiences. Um, if not, reflect on a couple of issues based on my own experience. And so here we are, and we are delighted that Stuti is kicking things off. She is going to be one of those alumni that we double count at JGU because she's doing her doctoral work at JGU now, but she's also done her LLM previously from Jindal Global Law School. So once again, Sudhi, thank you for being here. And today's theme, although we are going to focus on the where, when, and why of doctoral studies, we are really going to also just, have a conversation about the other themes that we are anticipating throughout the series as well. We just wanted to break it up in these themes, not so that we could kind of have speakers just focus on the topic du jour, but just to also give a sense for somebody who's just started thinking about this, to walk them through the different phases of a doctoral program, or even thinking through the decision-making aspect of it and what it entails, et cetera, right? So that's the only reason why we broke up this conversation into the different phases that you will have seen in the brochures. So that's quite enough from me. Stuti, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about why did you decide to do your doctorate straight after your LLM? What was the thought process involved in that decision? Did you at all consider uh, doing something else, or practicing, or any of the other things you could have done, and then going on and getting a doctorate? So why don't we start there?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I started with my doctoral journey right after my master's, and initially I was a bit hesitant, like everybody else, because I thought maybe I should take a break. I should have a work experience of a couple of years and then embark upon this journey. Because I understand that PhD itself is a huge commitment, and it's something that takes up all your time, energy, and it's challenging. So right after I was getting done with my master's, so I recall I was talking to my professor that I can't seem to decide what to do and when to do and how to do it. So he just told me one thing, that if you feel that you want to be the best in this field, and since this field is not the area of research on which I am working, my area of research is IP laws and the royalty rights of performers under IP laws. So it's a gray area in the Indian context. And this, I believe, is the perfect time to research on this issue, because had I done this a few years later, it would have made very little impact, because right now we have very few scholarships in this field, and whatever I do is going to contribute in making that field better, because we have legislations in place, but there is gross violation, there's no implementation, and somebody needs to point this out. So why not me? And why JGU? Because I clearly remember that when the pandemic started and we had to come back home, and I was still working on it. So I was kind of clueless. And at that time, the support that I got from my mentor is unparalleled. I come from a national law university, and I know how it is there and how it is at JGU, and how these two things are drastically different. The support that I needed at that moment, uh, I believe that had I been there, because I remember my first 5 years of law, so had I been there, I'm pretty sure my professors would have been like, oh, do a theoretical thing, or maybe focus more on the scholarships that are already available. But JGU gave me that outlook, JGU gave me that insight that no, if there's a challenge, now approach it in a different way. My supervisor, he encouraged me to go and talk to singers, because they are the performers in the field that I'm working. So that is a thought that had never come to my mind, that I can even approach them. So the mindset, the entire thing, it was very refreshing to work as a researcher in JGU. And since I had started with my research journey in my master's itself, I thought that I should take it forward through my doctoral journey. And to everybody who has joined us today, I would like to tell you that I am one of the few applicants that were early applicants for the PhD thing. And I am here, but I was rejected in the first round itself. And it's a whole different story. So I had submitted my research proposal, and I was very optimistic that I will be selected for this. But to my horror, I received an email, and it was written that we regret to inform you that you've been rejected on grounds of high plagiarism. And I was shocked, because that entire thing was written by me. So eventually, on challenging the decision and on reapplying and talking to them, we found out that the plagiarism that was showing was from my own dissertation from masters. So the entire thing, they had to go through the entire process once again, and I was given another chance to submit a revised proposal, and then eventually I am where I am. So I am thankful for this opportunity.
I love that your answer to why did you decide to do your PhD now is because, oh, only because I want to change the legal landscape of intellectual property law in India. That's one answer to the when question, I guess. But you've slightly preempted my next question, but I I like that you touched on the fact that during your LLM itself, you had found more or less your inspiration in terms
Yeah.
of your research question, your research interest. What would you offer by way of general advice then? Because not all master's programs are research programs, right? And how did that come about? And what specifically about the LLM degree experience is now helping you in your doctoral work?
I believe that the decision to pursue doctoral journey is very personal to each individual. Like for we might have various reasons to do it. My reason might not align with your reason. I might have chosen it just to get a prefix before my name, and that is also a good enough reason. But as far as masters is concerned, and how did I think of it? It's because I have always been very academic oriented. I was very clear since the beginning that I have to finish my studies, do my masters, start my doctoral journey, and then join academia, because I enjoy teaching. I enjoy being connected to a classroom. I enjoy interacting with people, a class full of 30 individuals, let's say. They come up with 30 different ideas to the same problem. And that is very interesting, and that is very appealing to me as a person. So I decided that I did not see a point in delaying this process, because there was this pandemic and there was not much to do. And um, I thought it's the best time to utilize the time and the resources and give proper dedication to what I want to do. Otherwise, the process had been delayed, or maybe the work experience might have maybe deflected me towards a different path altogether. So I do not want that to happen. And my master's is a very special, it's very special to me, because I, I know that I was not the same individual before joining JGU as a researcher and after being a part of JGU, because the entire outlook changed. Earlier, I think I was coming from a very restricted place, that this is the only way to go about things. But now, if there's a problem, let's say there's a research question, now I'll start looking for various different ideas, unconventional ways, how to crack it down and how to make it simpler for the people. Earlier, I was guided by the thought that maybe the research papers and the research articles are supposed to be very nuanced, or very difficult in terms of language, or things like that. But now, with the course of time and the understanding that I've gained, and with proper supervision of my mentors, obviously, I have understood that it's always better to break down your topic or whatever you're researching upon into smaller parts, so that the target audience, they understand what where I'm coming from and what is there to understand. Because teaching, uh, since I am a trip fellow and academic tutor, I'm involved in teaching process also. So it taught me that everything has to be simplified, because you never know what is coming across. Let's say there's this simple thing like my research topic, which is the royalty rights of singers. Now, I might make it very complex, but then what's the point of me working in this field if people are not able to understand what I'm working on? So these things are very, very crucial, according to me, while deciding how to go about in this field.
That's an interesting take. And we'll see how you feel about that as you're getting closer to your defense, as you're getting closer to your defense about the
Yeah.
whole simplification versus complicating, all of
Mm.
that kind of seesaw part of it. But with regard to your teaching experience, was that somehow a factor, the possibility of being able to teach, was that a factor also in your decision to continue at JGU for your doctoral degree? And how is that helping you? And I ask this because not all doctoral programs will give people the opportunity to do that. And a lot of literature is also kind of, there's a lot of commentary there which says that making graduate students teach, or making doctoral students teach, is actually a form of exploitation, and it doesn't help them, and it's just free labor, and it's like, it's so what is the kind of takeaway from teaching, and how can that feed into your research?
Yes, like I said, it gives us an awareness of the target audience. It tells us that how are we approaching something that is comprehensible for the students or for the people at large. And I personally feel that students, they come up with their own ideas, which might give you a different outlook altogether, that, oh, this is also one way I can go about doing something. So that ways, I think teaching gives us a very interesting opportunity to know about things from different dimensions. And I don't believe that it's unpaid labor, or it's my personal opinion, because I personally enjoy teaching because I feel that there's always, it's a learning experience. If you know something, you're teaching it to people, and the questions that they ask in return, they give us also some clarity as teachers, because there are things that we might have missed upon, and it gives us a clarity about those things, that okay, this is also something I need to know. And through that process, it makes things smoother, and it makes things more, I would say, maybe, uh, how to put it, it's really tough to put it, um
More concrete,
no,
perhaps?
not concrete, simplified, and it gives a structure to it, that okay, first we start with the topic, then we start explaining the subtopics and what are the critical things that we need to
Yeah,
delve
because
into.
you're already kind of thinking of it in terms
Yeah,
of translating it to an audience, right? That's
yeah,
what you're trying to say.
yes. And uh, as a student, most of us, we have this complaint that our teachers, they are very knowledgeable, but they're not able to pass this knowledge to the students. So I really feel that through teaching, and if I'm teaching this, if I have knowledge about some field, and if I'm teaching in a way that is making it simplified for the students, it's a proper passage of knowledge to the students, which I think very few teachers have this expertise, because I personally have come across, I shouldn't be saying this, but this is the truth. So yeah.
Well said, Stuti. Before I ask you the next question, I'm going to invite our lovely attendees to please start asking their questions via the Q&A box, or just put them in the chat function as well. So we're going to be ready. We're going to do these like real quick sessions, just 45 minutes. So we are going to be ready to jump to audience Q&A very soon. One thing I wanted to ask you is there's always this question on people's mind, which is that, okay, for someone like me who is from the social sciences, it's possibly easier to kind of envision that transition from undergraduate to master's to doctorate. But how does that all work in law? Because the law degree, the first law degree is a professional program. It's and so much of the training is geared to practice, right? So is there a mindset shift that needs to happen, or is there a certain amount of pushback against your own previous training that you find yourself doing now that you've gone from the realm of law as practice
Yeah.
to law as like legal research? What are your thoughts on that?
Certainly, I agree to what you just said, because law, the way we are taught for the initial 5 years, it's from a practitioner's approach. And suddenly, when you embark on a master's journey or a PhD journey, you start your journey as a legal researcher. So it's very, very different, because the entire mindset has to shift from a practitioner to a legal researcher. And you start asking questions, you start looking at problems in a different way, and instead of just going by the practical approach to it, you start analyzing things, and you start uh, going deeper into a topic, so that you have a better command over it, and you are able to pass it on to the people who are coming to you for guidance. So I agree that it's very, very different for a law student to shift entirely from a practitioner to a legal researcher. But then we have people who already have research interest in their first 5 years of law school, and they are already into publishing, and they get very nice publications and articles and commentaries or blogs or whatsoever. So it's a personal choice, but as an individual also, I believe that it's a shift that you have to make from a legal practitioner to a legal researcher.
Fantastic. I see that there's a hand up, one of the attendees. Prashant, would you like to ask your question now?
Yeah, the question
Oh,
is,
I have to allow you to talk. Okay. Prashant, I've just allowed you to talk. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so is my voice audible, Stuti?
yeah, hi Prashant.
Yes.
Hi, Stuti. Like, nice to hear your experience. Actually, like, I was not knowing that I could ask the question, so I just type it on the chat in the chat box. But glad that I can ask. Like, Stuti, like, I think you are about to complete your PhD program, if I'm not wrong, right?
No, I've just begun my PhD journey. I'm very new in this, but yeah, I'm ready to answer your question.
Yeah.
Please.
So, based on your experiences, like,
Yeah.
what you suggest, like the thesis, like the PhD journey, like once you get your PhD doctorate degree, so you suggest that a simple language is necessary for your thesis, and it's better to like. Write your thesis not only from a publication point, definitely you have to
Mm,
publish it, but
mm,
also from like from a practical aspect, like the at least like when you, because whatever you do in your research, definitely for the next few years also, you have to work on that to get your paper published, and there would be an enormous amount of time you are going to invest on your
very
thesis.
true. Yeah.
So, what you suggest in that regard?
See, thank you for your question, first of all. Let me tell you one thing, there's no right answer to this question. There are people who prefer to have their writings in a different structure, like which we might label it as a complex structure. There are people who would prefer it to be simpler, to engage larger audiences
Right.
so that people get a connect. Because if you have to let's say refer to a dictionary every now and then, few people might not like it and few people might like it because they feel that there's something to learn from it.
Right.
So as my personal choice, I would say that it's better to make it comprehensible for your audience, because once you start writing something, let's say from a publication point of view, or let's say even for the thesis, you are trying to tell people about a topic or an issue or a problem, and you are going to cover all the aspects. So if you're not able to communicate in a proper way that the audience understands it, I believe that your entire research will go to waste. Otherwise, what is the point of you spending 4 5 long years working on something with all your heart and soul, and then if the entire purpose is not served, if the people don't understand what you've researched upon,
Right. Right.
so that ways I, as an individual, would prefer it to be a bit simpler so that larger people, like most people, can understand and they are able to follow what you're trying to tell.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly, Sudhi, because like sometimes there's one thing which comes in my mind as well, like the audience, the way that the younger generation, like our generation
Mhm.
and a generation just slightly below us also, like they are like their moods are also changing. They really want a simple and straightforward and more practical oriented like way. Like it can be in the form of a thesis, it can be in the form of a lecture or research, so that they can understand, rather than writing a very fancy thing and with a fancy vocabulary, something which hardly 0.001% could understand.
Yeah, Prashant, if I may, I mean, because this is a very interesting question, and we'll probably, we may or may not return to this later, in
Right.
the forthcoming session. So if I may, I'll just weigh in quickly.
Yeah, sure.
I think simple language works regardless of who your audience is. The trick is that you have to know who your audience is, right? And to give you a concrete example, when I defended my doctoral work, I was defending it before a committee of law professors, right? Because my doctoral degree was in law. However, when I then went to the publisher to submit the book proposal, I realized I wanted to talk to a much broader international relations audience, which is what my field is, right? Which is what my field of teaching and my other work in my previous publishing is in. So immediately my thesis had to be completely reworked and reimagined to be able to translate and reach that broader audience, right? One thing I would say is which is an important caveat, that I take on board your point that people now want things a lot more simplified and actionable and, in that sense, quote unquote, like, sexy. But one thing about doctoral scholarship is that you have to be aware that you are making a contribution to your field and you need to make a demonstrable contribution to the field, right? So to the extent that that requires you to be very conceptual in your thinking or engage with terminology or jargon or theory and stuff like that, you need to do that, right?
Okay.
So that's very much still part of the doctoral work experience, and that's the idea, because ultimately you are being given entry into a certain profession on the existing terms of that profession or that discipline, right? So that gatekeeping aspect, which is happening on a maybe more technical basis or based on more some technical criteria, to the extent that that needs you to imbibe those tricks of the trade and deliver on that aspect, there's nothing to that's nothing to shy away from, right? Because those are the rules. Thank you so much, Prashant. I'm afraid we have to jump to the next
Thank you,
question.
Stuti. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So Parvez, you've asked, is some work experience preferable before joining PhD? Just after master's, the attitude is mostly academic oriented. My short answer to that is yes, yes, yes. Because that's what I did. And this is why this conversation is so interesting, because Stuti, go ahead. You might have a slightly different take.
Yeah, I don't think that it's preferable. I mean, it's not mandatory because there's no correct time to start your PhD journey. There are people in my own, the people who've joined with me in the doctoral program. They are way senior to me. They have 10 years of experience. We have a justice in our batch, a justice of Kerala High Court. So those things are very overwhelming as a fresher, I would say. But once you understand that there is something that you want to do, and this is a commitment that you want to make, you want to start with your doctoral journey, so there's no right time. You might go for a work experience, you might not go for a work experience. I don't think it's going to matter because I am a fresher, so I am a little biased that it's okay to join even though you're a fresher. And I believe what is important is believing in yourself that it is a journey that you've started and you're going to finish it no matter what, because there will be days, because coming from my own experience, my first month of doctoral journey was a nightmare for me. Why? Because I could not connect with what was happening in class. And interestingly, JGU is one of those very few institutions which conduct classes for PhD students also. So I'm a part-time PhD fellow at JGU, and we have classes on the weekends. And I could not connect with my own classmates because I was a fresher and everybody was a everybody was a senior, and I am way junior to them. And uh, this is where experience comes from, and this is why experience is important at that time, because a few of my classmates, they started talking to me, and then they tried to make me calm about it, that it's okay that I've started on this journey early. And eventually with time I also absorbed that fine, I am now on this journey and I'm not quitting, and I'm doing fairly well in it. So it's not something which is mandatory. If you feel that you should have a work experience to get more insight about the topic that you're working on or the field that you want to research upon, please go ahead. But if you feel that there's a legal question, or there's a question for that matter that you want to answer, you can straight away start with your PhD right after your master's. There's no right or wrong time for it.
That's very well put, Suti. I would also say that it depends on what type of research you see yourself doing, right?
Yeah.
Uh, a number of people find that spark or that very specific area that they're looking for during their master's degrees, for example, or they find a supervisor that they have to work with, right? We are going to hear from people like that in forthcoming sessions. So that's fine. That's a straight line then. But where a lot of other experience will help you is, first of all, when you're trying to find, if you still don't have a very specific idea of what you want to work on, then your experience out in the world doing other things will certainly come in handy. Then, of course, the network that you develop, whether in terms of then conducting your research or, gathering data, etc., that's helpful. And then later on, of course, the other experience, whether in terms of getting a job as a, after your doctorate is over, or in terms of what are you thinking about the possibilities of what you're going to do with your doctorate, or as an academic, that previous experience really shapes, your philosophy as a teacher, and as a researcher, and the kind of impact you seek to have, right? So not just in terms of doctoral work, I think this previous experience or pre-doctoral experience in whatever form, it really goes a long way in shaping your academic career. The one thing I will warn you about, having gone down this road of working in different fields for a number of years and then doing my doctorate, is it's extremely hard to re-enter that student life, right? It's not easy. And the truth is that a doctoral program is nothing like your previous education, right? It's not a continuation of your entire schooling from, kindergarten up to masters, right? It's an extremely self-driven endeavor with a lot of hardship and amid a lot of constraints. And it's not easy falling back into that life once you've kind of, been a working professional and an independent person in that sense for a while. So it's really, I mean, something, all of these considerations may be something to be weighed. Okay, there's one question about, I think the Bhargavi's question is more or less similar. Do we need practice experience even when we have a PhD to apply for position of assistant professor? If yes, then how many years do we need to practice? I mean, this is really, this varies a lot, not just from one institution to another, but even with the same institution, it depends on what they're looking for at that particular point of time. This question is more for you. What was the application process like for the PhD at JGLS?
So yeah, if we talk about the application process for JGLS, since I applied only for JGLS, so I have an idea only about JGLS. First, you need to fill up the form on the website of JGU. Then there are certain criteria, like you need to submit a SOP stating why you want to pursue doctoral studies and why only from JGU itself. So that is very crucial, because you can't just cut, copy, paste things from the internet and be that, okay, my 500 words are done. No, SOP is something which really sets you apart, because that is your own purpose of embarking on this journey. And you can't just copy things, because what I believe is that the professors, once they glance through your SOP, they have an idea if it's an original creation or if it's from the internet and you've just made minor modifications. And it is one of the criteria where you are rejected in the first place. So that is very important how you draft your SOP. Then, after filling up your application form, you also have to submit alongside a research proposal, which has to be fairly around 1500 to 2000 words. And that has to be mandatorily your own original research piece, because that goes through a strict plagiarism check. And the plagiarism level has to be below 15%. Like I said, I was rejected in the first round because my plagiarism level, it came at 16%, and that too from my own dissertation, which was later clarified and it went down to 4%. But all I'm trying to say is you have to be very mindful about what you upload as your SOP or your research proposal, because it is something which is scrutinized, which is uh, corrected by the professors who have lots of experience. And that is something which I feel is where you should be very honest to yourself, that you're not plagiarizing it from somewhere. You are, that is something you have to work on for the next 4 5 years of your life. So be very mindful of the fact that whatever you're writing in your proposal and how you are planning to go about doing research in that field, and what are your research questions. So you have to frame it in such a way that all of these things are clear. And also you need to mention about the research methodology that you aim to adopt. And many of my colleagues, they ask me that, do we need to have a topic in mind while applying or while drafting our research proposal? I would say that no, there's nothing like you need to have a specific topic. You can have a broad area, broad theme, and you can write about it, and you can mention that this is the area where you want to work upon. And narrowing it down comes later after your literature review process and after you're done with your mandatory 11 credits course of different subjects. So that is one thing. And the first round of rejections are sent right after going through your research proposals, and they have to be your original piece. I can't stress it enough because I had that setback. So yeah. And then if you're one of those lucky people who cross that stage, round one, there'll be round two where you'll have to take the exam. There'll be a question paper which will be shared with you, and there will be time allotted, and that will mostly be from jurisprudence and constitution and human rights, where in the section, the paper will be divided into three parts: section A, B, and C. A will be mandatory, B will be pick any three out of four questions, and C will also be pick any three out of four questions. So all in all, you need to answer 10 questions. And again, you can't copy it because it goes through a strict plagiarism check, and you have to frame it on your own. So after these two rounds are over, and there's a timeline stipulated within which you have to submit, otherwise you will be disqualified from the process. And once you submit the answer script and then the corrections, and if you qualify the second round, you have to appear before a panel of highly esteemed people. They can be Professor Chimney, Professor Bakshi, they can be anybody from our JGU faculty. So that is something that you need to be very careful about. And there you need to discuss about your research proposal, that what made you think about that topic or that broad theme, and what is it that you aim to do through your research work. And there will be questions, and it is going to be a very interesting conversation based interview sort of a thing. And it will be very nuanced because they'll ask you uh, specific questions where, if you know things, you know things. If you don't, you clearly don't. You can't make up answers there. And after that third round is over, you will be notified in a few days' time whether you've made it to the list or if you haven't made it. So this is the process of getting into a PhD program at JGLS.
Very scary.
No, it's not. We just have to be honest with whatever we
Well,
do.
you know, I think it should be a bit intimidating, and I'll tell you why, because at least you know what you're getting yourself into early enough, right? So that should you decide this is not for me, you need not waste another 3 or 4 years of your life, as many people in fact do, and just you know, cut your losses at that point. There are a couple more questions. Are people who qualify NET exempted from giving the entrance exam? Do you know?
Yes, they are exempted from giving the entrance exam, but these are things that are notified from time to time. Like the fresh set of applications, I think they must have started and must be getting over by the end of April. So please visit the website, have a look about the exams that they are exempting. And I think NEC is exempted. So, but please have a look at the website and it will give you more clarity because everything is mentioned on the website also, not in a very detailed way, but yeah, you'll get a fair idea of what you're getting yourself into.
And I guess that applies to the next question
Yes.
too, which is how much does the doctoral program cost? So I will just point you
I
to
just have
the
one
to
thing to add there about the cost of doctoral program at JGU. So first you have to decide whether you want to do a part-time PhD or a full-time PhD. If you are doing a full-time PhD and if you qualify the exams and there are things that you get like a stipend, like a waiver, and you can avail those things. And if you are net qualified, there are things, there are exemptions and uh, apart from being a research fellow or a doctoral fellow, there will be, I think currently 35,000 is paid monthly to a full time research fellow who qualifies those criteria. And if you are a part time fellow, there is no stipend or something that you get for doing a PhD at JGU or anywhere for that matter. So, first you decide if you have to embark on a full time journey or a part time journey. So that is very important. And after it, I think you can go through the website and know what is the cost of each and how to go about it.
Okay, fantastic. If there are no final questions, I just want to, of course, thank you very much, Stuti, for all the amazing information and inspiration you've shared with us today. Couldn't be more proud of you and excited for you, and wish you the best for the rest of your doctoral journey. To our attendees, just to say that thank you for your time today. We hope you will join us throughout this webinar series. And tomorrow we'll be talking about the next phase, which is once you've decided when, where, and why, how do you get the pitch right? So we're going to focus a lot more on the doctoral applications aspect of it. Then on Wednesday, we go into what does the early phase of any doctoral program essentially entail? How do you define your project and that sort of aspect of it? Then on Thursday, we'll be talking about method and mentorship, another fairly controversial area around which there's a lot of different people think in different ways. So we'll figure that out. And then we'll close on Friday with defense and what comes after. So hopefully you will join us again throughout the rest of this week. Thank you so much, Stuti. Best wishes to your family and good evening, good night, everybody. Bye.
Bye.